Heroes are defined by their weakness as much as their strength. Mario can jump on enemies all day, but the second he runs straight into them, he's toast. Link has an insane amount of weapons at his disposal, but in most of his adventures, he's locked to the ground and not able to jump on his own. Even Sora, who's got a handful of melee, magic, and defensive options to choose from, often has to choose which stats and abilities to prioritize over others. Nobody can have it all. And perhaps no genre communicates these weaknesses more effectively than horror. There are lots of ways for a developer to elicit fear in the player, but the most important element is how the game communicates power and limitations. How powerful are your adversaries, and how powerless are you by comparison? And how are you supposed to portray any of this in 1986 on the NES? Hi there, my name is Daniel, and I think Castlevania is pretty creative. Nowadays, when you hear the name Castlevania, there's probably a lot of clashing images that come to mind. Yeah, this series has been through a lot over the years. But before it was a high-octane action game, online co-op experience, or even the exploratory adventure that would step alongside Metroid to define an entire genre, this long line of vampiric quests came from surprisingly humble beginnings. Not a whole lot is known about the game's director, Hitoshi Akamatsu. But what we do know is that this guy loved movies. Particularly, he was fascinated by classic horror films and their ability to invoke feelings of fear and dread in the viewer. And his team was driven from the very get-go to replicate this feeling and create a cinematic experience in their upcoming game. Now, of course, it was the mid-80s, so they didn't have flashy cutscenes or immersive AI to get the job done. They had games that looked like this and a controller that looked like this. And while your side-scrollers of the day were certainly difficult, I wouldn't really describe them as particularly frightening at any point. It was going to be a challenge to create a competent horror game with such a limited toolkit, but it was how Konami leveraged these limitations that made all the difference. But this team wasn't going to get anywhere without the proper story and setting. Punishing enemies in a limited moveset might create an imposing challenge, but it's really the atmosphere that makes it scary. And the atmosphere Konami chose to go with for this adventure was Dracula's Castle. Probably never heard of it, right? But for real, you'll recognize a ton of enemies from various stories across pop culture. And even though it does feel a little goofy in hindsight to see this random collection of monsters all crammed into one place, these familiar characters actually go a long way towards establishing the tone of our adventure. Medusa, Frankenstein's creation, death. You've seen these monsters before, and being positioned as a single person up against all of them is a pretty solid start. And that brings me to you. Well, your character, because Castlevania places you in the outfit of Simon Belmont, the latest in a long line of legendary vampire hunters. And in this particular instance, you've been commissioned to vanquish Count Dracula himself, who, surprise, has had trouble staying dead since Simon's ancestor defeated him a century prior. This actually becomes a bit of a pattern throughout the series, and leads to a number of convoluted scenarios revolving around Dracula's revival. But before it basically became an anime, and then actually did become an anime, man, I love this series. The presentation in this first entry was actually pretty straightforward. The big bad is back, and all you gotta do is overcome overwhelming odds to defeat him. Light versus darkness, David versus Goliath, bada bing bada boom. If only it was that simple to actually beat the game. At first glance, Castlevania might seem absurdly simple by today's standards. It's super short. There are only 6 stages in the entire game, and the design of these stages, on paper, isn't all that interesting either. You're typically traveling through hallways or climbing up staircases, and aren't often required to do any fancy platforming. Each stage does have little gimmicks to keep things interesting, but these never really felt like the main event during my time with the game. No, the main event was the enemies. Like I said before, Castlevania relies heavily on its characters to set the tone and build its atmosphere. And if the goal was to instill a feeling of fear in the face of insurmountable odds, mission accomplished, folks. right at the very beginning, you're faced with an endlessly respawning horde of zombies that indiscriminately press forward, whether you're in the way or not. And I mean, okay, I can deal with these guys, but oh my goodness, it gets worse. These moonwalking skeletons throw you a bone, but not in a good way. Then you've got the classic axe armor enemies, which make these vertical sections super fun. And of course, I can't forget everyone's favorite, the Medusa heads. Talk about relentless. But no, in my experience, all of these pale in comparison to the Flea Man. Seriously, even the Medusa heads have predictable movement patterns that you can work around. But these guys? Their erratic movement is already hard to track with. And then they just freaking launch themselves at you at just the right trajectory to make themselves difficult to hit. For real, I often found myself just crouching in the corner and waiting these guys out whenever I saw them. There really is nothing like hiding from enemies half your size to make you feel truly powerless. But there's no way you're a total pushover, right? I mean, you started the game armed with a freaking whip, for crying out loud. So yes, Simon does have some tricks up his sleeve as well. But even these blessings each come with a curse in hand. So take the whip, for instance. At first glance, this thing seems awesome. It has a ton of range, and it can even be upgraded twice. But it also comes with a stunning 16 frames of input lag, and completely halts your movement if used on the ground. It also only provides lateral coverage, so if you got dudes hovering above you, which you will, you're gonna need some more help. And that help comes in the form of these guys. Just like Mario and Mega Man, Simon's got a handful of power-ups to help him in his quest. And these sub-weapons are found by breaking open these candlesticks throughout each stage. You'll probably stumble upon the knife first, which isn't that strong, but gives you even more range than the whip. The axe provides that vertical coverage we've been wanting, but gives you a very specific trajectory to work with. The stopwatch requires the most hearts to use, but it's super helpful as it halts all enemy movement on the current screen for a few seconds. But y'all, don't even get me started on holy water. This stuff is freaking awesome. I mean, sure, it has a short range and it's limited to the ground, but it stays active for a bit, allowing you to inflict continual damage and even use it as a sort of shield. Take that, Flea Man! Each sub-weapon has its own strengths and drawbacks, and it's up to the player to learn when to use each one most effectively, especially since any sub-weapon you pick up replaces whatever you previously had in stock. That's right, you can't just be blindly demolishing every candlestick in your path. You have to learn the game, formulate your plan, and make intentional choices to stick to that plan. And that intentionality is made all the more crucial by how unforgiving this game's movement mechanics are. Need I remind you that this is what we've been given to face off against Dracula's army of the night? But okay, simplicity's not a bad thing, and there are plenty of other NES titles that get a lot of mileage out of 2 buttons and a D-pad. But unlike Mario, you can't move faster than a crawl. And unlike Metroid, you can't adjust your trajectory mid-jump. But hey, Castlevania does keep Mega Man's soul-crushing knockback, so that's good news, right? Seriously, I will forever have nightmares that look like this. Congrats, Konami, you made your horror game. Castlevania is a game about limitations. You don't have many resources, and the resources you do have come with heavy trade-offs. Nothing is free. This reality is always in front of you, and it makes victory feel that much sweeter when you finally do achieve it. Nowadays, victory in video games can feel pretty manufactured, as if the game is wanting me to think I made this massive accomplishment, when in reality, I was really just going through the motions until I saw the credits roll. But if you're seeing the credits roll in Castlevania, you've earned it. You've accepted your limitations and learned how to leverage them to overcome the obstacles ahead of you. Have you ever come face to face with the humbling reality of your own limitations? They could be physical, psychological, or even societal. But limitations are a part of what it means to be human that we can all relate with. For me personally, the last 2 years have been incredibly difficult physically and have forced me to restructure much of my lifestyle. But even though these have been the hardest 2 years of my life thus far, I can confidently say that I am grateful for how they've changed me. These challenges and limitations have pushed me to grow, and my life is better as a result. I've gained more discipline in the decisions I make, and I've been given deeper compassion for others who are walking through painful circumstances. Now, my experience is not yours, But my prayer for anyone watching this is that you would be able to find a way forward in your own pain that will bring growth and restoration in your life. Thanks so much for watching. I'd like to dedicate this episode to my friend and mentor, Colin. Thank you for walking alongside me the last several years and sitting with me in my pain. You've modeled for me how to show patient love while also challenging others to grow. I'm grateful for your friendship and example, Colin. And for the rest of you friends, I want you to know that you're loved, you're valuable, and you are creative. God bless y'all. Have a great day.